Hi, Sheila.
Hi. Who's speaking?
David.
Oh, David, sorry. You're right underneath me, actually.
Well,
Peace. This is Dory speaking. Hello.
hi, Dory. How are you?
All right. Yourself?
Fine, thank you.
Shana Tova.
Shannon Tova to you.
It's over. I think we'll probably all be muted shortly.
Hi, everybody. Just a couple more minutes to just wait for a lot of people who are joining, and then Sheila's going to begin. Just a couple more minutes. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry about that, it's my doorbell going. Good to see you all here. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces on my screen, and I hope everybody is staying well. Very excited to be, as I welcoming you to this very special event. We've had people registering all day long, and I promise you it's going to be a very exciting, interesting hour. So my name is Sheila Giwob. I'm Senior Vice President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which is a 260-year-old representative body of the British jury. So I'm honoured to be co-hosting this event. It's a unique and prestigious event on behalf of the Board of Deputies, alongside the World Jewish Congress Diplomatic Corps and the S&P Sephardi Community. So Efrat, at this point, would you like to introduce yourself? Okay.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Thank you. And I'm joining you as a wearer of all three hats. I'm very honored to be a deputy and a member of the WJC Jewish Diplomatic Corps. It's the flagship program of the World Jewish Congress, where we have 300 young leaders from all over the world helping Jewish community diplomatically. And of course, I'm honored to be a member of the S&P Sephardi Community.
Thank you. Rabbi Dweck, would you like to make a short introduction to yourself to people who may not know you?
Thank you, Sheila. It's an honor and pleasure to be able to participate this afternoon. We're really very much looking forward. I'll save my my more detailed words for the end, but really good to see members of the community on and broader members of the Jewish community here in the UK. Very interested to hear the Lieutenant Colonel's briefing. So we're very grateful to him for that as well.
Thank you. Okay, so it's really good that we have the opportunity in these difficult times to be able to come together virtually. You know, the interconnectivity we have seen since the pandemic started across national boundaries have enabled us to have events like this. And Lieutenant Colonel, we're delighted that you're joining us this evening. I'll briefly introduce you, but you know, I also want to say that we at the Board of Deputies warmly welcomed the Abraham Accords. For so long, the Arab peace plan dictated that peace with Israel had to wait until peace with the Palestinians was achieved. And clearly some states are beginning to deviate from this, and we will always welcome any advance towards peace. It's also our sincerest hope that this development in the spirit of cooperation, of people-to-people relationships, building tolerance, will lead to peace with other Arab neighbours, including the Palestinians, and greatly enhance the security and flourishing of Israel and all in the Middle East, please God. Okay. However, the region is still a complicated and turbulent place, and this is why I'm so glad that Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus is here today to reflect on these historic developments and discuss the challenges that still face Israel. So the Lieutenant Colonel is head of the international media branch of the IDF Spokesperson unit, which means that he is the IDF spokesperson to the world, and I'll let him explain a bit more about what's been happening recently in developments. So he is responsible for the public affairs and public diplomacy of the IDF in traditional as well as in social media, and he leads a team of more than 50 highly talented Israeli men and women. After making Aliyah at the age of 13, the Lieutenant Colonel has been serving in the IDF for 20 years in various capacities, including combat experience from Lebanon and Gaza as a platoon and company commander, whilst focusing the majority of his military service on international relations and military diplomacy. So again, he can explain a bit more about himself. Just a brief introduction. I don't want to eat into the time. A little bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded, but everybody will be muted while it's going on. And after the Lieutenant Colonel's presentation, there will be a Q&A question and answer session. If you want to ask a question, please write in the Zoom chat and send it to Talia Ingleby, our International Relations Officer at the Board of Deputies, who will collate all the questions. The Q&A session itself will be moderated by Efrat, who's just introduced herself. And if we don't have enough time for everybody, I really apologise, but you know, we'll do the best we can. So now, without further ado, Lieutenant Colonel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It is a pleasure, and good evening to everybody. Shalom from Tel Aviv. A pleasure to be here. I think it's the first time that I have the honor of speaking with these three groups combined, and it's definitely a pleasure, and I see this as a great opportunity to engage with and inform and give you a bit of a rundown on the situation along our borders, the challenges that we face, a few glimpses of hope, but being a military man, I'll be speaking, bottom line and tachlis, and less about politics and regional events, and more about the threats we face and how we intend to deal with them, how we're dealing with them now, and how we intend to deal with them in the future. We'll speak about what we had planned was to speak about the threats along our borders, speak about Lebanon, about Syria, the common denominator there being Iranian malign activity in the Middle East, and then to speak about Gaza and a few things about the maritime situation in the Eastern Mediterranean. However, I just got off briefing about 40 correspondents from the representatives of the international media here in Israel, and I informed them of breaking news, fresh really from the latest minutes, of another terror tunnel that the IDF exposed, another tunnel that was dug from the Gaza Strip into Israel, violating Israeli sovereignty, fortunately enough, not crossing beyond an underground wall that we have built along the border with Gaza. And again, I'm happy to say that there was no threat to Israeli communities nearby, but this was an active tunnel dug from Gaza into Israel, where our sensors in the ground indicated that a tunnel was being dug or excavated. And yesterday evening, we started drilling with special engineering equipment in order to find and locate the tunnel. And just a few hours ago, we finally hit the tunnel. It is dozens of meters deep. And I'll share my screen and I'll show you a short infographic that we've done to better explain where it is. I hope everybody can see. Somebody just nod if you can see a map of Israel. Great. So I'll play, and hopefully the gods of Wi-Fi and connection will be with us. They'll be kind and you'll be able to see, but I'll freeze it every few seconds. So we're talking about the Gaza Strip. I'm pausing it now, and we're talking about this area, the southern part of the Gaza Strip. One of the largest cities here in Gaza is called Khan Yunis, and we have Israeli communities here just by. You see this little dot here, and this dot here, and this here, and this here. These are all Israeli communities. There are many kibbutzim and other Israeli communities in the region, and the tunnel was dug from the Khan Yunis area, crossed the border, as I will show you now. This is a zoom in of the area. You can see the path of where the tunnel was dug, and this is of course an illustration. We haven't mapped out the exact location of the tunnel yet. We just discovered it a few hours ago, but it was roughly dozens of meters inside Israeli territory, so a violation of our sovereignty. And the X factor, or the game-changing thing on the ground here, or rather below ground, is our sensory concrete barrier here in yellow on the right, which you can imagine is a three-component defense mechanism. One component, maybe the most important one, is a 1 meter thick wall, which runs underground at great depth. I cannot say how deep it goes. It goes as deep as necessary. And it's there in order to provide a hard obstacle for any terrorist trying to dig through into Israel. That's one physical boundary. The second component of that barrier is lots of sensors that we have on the barrier itself and in the surroundings, which indicate if there's any malign terrorist activity nearby. And the third component is an above ground component and a strong fortified fence that is being built above ground, so that we have a strong line of defense above ground. If the Palestinians try, if Hamas or anybody else try again to rush our fence and to send rioters forward in order to tear down the fence, then this is a very robust barrier that we have built above ground. which serves for that purpose. And I'm happy to say that as the situation is now, it appears that the sensory concrete barrier did its job. It's a rather an ambitious engineering project. It's more than 40 kilometers. If I go back a little bit in the video, you can see that the Gaza Strip, as you'll remember, is around, just one second, is around is around 65 kilometers. The border between the Gaza Strip and Israel is around 65 kilometers. And since we understood long ago that the terrorist organizations inside Gaza continue to dig tunnels and have them as a kind of a doomsday weapon by which to terrorize Israeli civilians and to have a military way of overcoming or undercoming our defenses, then the state of Israel invested billions of Israeli shekels to build this obstacle. We are now nearing completion. So if you, whenever COVID decides to part from our reality and we can again travel freely, and I hope that will happen soon, and I'll see as many as possible of you soon in Israel again, then if you'll go to a community near Gaza, you can feel perfectly safe, because in March, we will have March 2021, we will have completed all of those 65 kilometers from the Egyptian Israeli Gaza border in the south, along the entire line, and then all the way up to the Israeli border in Gaza and the Mediterranean Sea. 65 kilometers, and then we will have a very robust and solid defense. So I thought it would be fitting to start with the breaking news, just fresh, happened now, a positive event where our defenses are working and providing the necessary indication. No risk to Israeli communities, but of course, again, evidence to where priorities in Gaza lay. They do not, unfortunately, lay with enhancing or improving living standards inside the Gaza Strip. They do not lay with dealing with the COVID-19 crisis inside Gaza, and they do not lay with peace with Israel. On the contrary, despite the fact that Gaza has been enjoying quite many months of relative calm and stability, the tunnel that we just exposed is another proof to the very malign intentions of Hamas and other terrorist organizations. Last word, we do not know yet which specific organization dug this tunnel, because there's more than one terror organization operating in Gaza, but the overall responsibility lies with Hamas. Hamas is responsible for the Gaza Strip. Hamas governs the Gaza Strip. It has been ruling the Gaza Strip for more than 12 years, unfortunately, for everybody involved. And any acts of violence or any threats emanating from the Gaza Strip towards Israel are at the responsibility of the Gaza Strip. So having said that, if that's okay with everybody, I'll zoom out now and we'll go into, we'll go into speaking quickly about the other threats that we face along our borders. We'll speak about Syria, we'll speak about Lebanon, and since I spoke now about the threats that we have along our southern border, I won't go back to them. If you'll just give me a second, I'll find the tab that I had. Just a moment. Okay, it is loading, and in a second I will share my screen. What I will give you now is a very strategic, I'd say, display of the different threats that we face according to geographical order. And I'll have a map here just for the visual effect. And we'll speak a little bit about the different things that we are concerned with as we speak. And I will share my screen just now. Okay, again, I need a nod of approval that we can see a map. Great, thank you very much. You're very cooperative. That's appreciated. Okay, so again, I apologize. I had a bug and I haven't been able to turn it into English. So I apologize. There's Hebrew and there's Arabic, but I suppose most of you read one of those languages. But anyhow, we are. This is of course Israel. We have Syria here, Lebanon, Jordan, and then the Gaza Strip down here below. Okay, so in terms of threats, the most vivid and live and real-time imminent threat that we face on a military level is Hezbollah in Lebanon. I'm happy to say that the intelligence assessment and our working assumption is that Hezbollah's military capabilities, despite the fact that they are stronger than a few European countries, Hezbollah today has more firepower than many European militaries, which is quite astonishing when you come to think of it, that a local Levantine militia has more firepower than many sovereign European states, but that is reality, despite the fact that they have significant military capabilities, and I will detail them in just a second. A bottom line, which is very important, is that we do not see Hezbollah as an existential threat. We see Hezbollah as a terrorist army, as an organization that really has a stranglehold on Lebanon and is using Lebanon in order to serve Iranian purposes. And in many senses, you can say that Hezbollah is holding Lebanon hostage with an arsenal of more than 130,000, I'll repeat the number, 130,000 rockets that are stored, or actually I should say hidden, behind schools, mosques, hospitals, and most importantly and most frequently, homes of Lebanese civilians all over Lebanon. In the capital Beirut, and I'll give a few examples, and all over other parts in the south and in the central part of Lebanon as well. I'll give a few examples of Lebanon. We recently exposed, a few weeks ago, another weapons manufacturing site in the heart of Beirut, and as fast as my Wi-Fi connection is, I will zoom in and I'll give you a location. So I hope everybody can see Beirut. This is Beirut. The area where the very unfortunate and tragic accident of the explosion in the port of Beirut was here. This is the main port, the main pier, and this is where the grain silo, the tip of the arrow is where the grain silo is. And this is where the unfortunate explosion in the beginning of August occurred. And we exposed different Hezbollah locations that are hidden in neighborhoods in south and central Beirut. All of them operated by Hamas. We're talking about these areas very close to the international airport, the Rafik Hariri International Airport in Beirut. There are still, unfortunately, lots of basically manufacturing sites where Hezbollah is working on their next level of weapons, and these are precision-guided missiles. Hezbollah has a large arsenal, as I said, of 130,000 rockets. The bad thing with rockets, from the perspective of Hezbollah terrorists, is that they're not accurate. And you can basically fire them, but it's very difficult to steer, and you can't really, and they're not accurate. What Hezbollah is trying to do, recognizing the shortcoming of the arsenal that they have, is trying to develop more advanced weaponry, specifically these missiles, and that's what they're doing inside Beirut and in other locations in Lebanon. We are following those activities. We expose those activities, and I can assure you and everybody else that we have a large and growing bank or a list of targets, military targets, which will be attacked if we are fired upon from Lebanon by Hezbollah. Now, the very unfortunate thing here, and this is without even an ounce of cynicism, the very unfortunate, the tragic situation is that Hezbollah purposely locates all of their military infrastructure, whether it is command and control centers, or manufacturing sites of weapons, or storage facilities where they store rockets and explosives and missiles, or bunkers where their fighters are and from where they run their operations. All of their military machine is embedded within or beneath civilian infrastructure in Lebanon. And if there's an important takeaway from my perspective to you from this evening and from the time that we will be spending together, it is that we all know what happens in the Middle East whenever Israel is fired upon. We don't turn the other cheek and wait for a second or a third salvo. We retaliate. And we have, as I said, lots of military targets that are qualified military targets of military assets. And I can tell you, they will be attacked. Now, the unfortunate thing is that there are civilians by those targets. I can assure you that we will do the utmost necessary to minimize collateral damage, but the unfortunate reality, anticipated reality, is that there will be collateral damage, which is military speak for uninvolved civilians, unfortunately caught in places where they rather shouldn't have been. That's a cruel reality of the situation. And if there's one thing that's important for me, is that you know this before it happens, and that legislators, opinion makers, politicians, and people of influence all over the UK and other parts of the world know this in advance and act in order to apply pressure on Lebanon, the Lebanese government, and Hezbollah, and anybody who supports Hezbollah, and again underlying the very corrupt and cynical use that Hezbollah makes of human shields. That's a very important topic from my end, because if we will be fired upon by Hezbollah, we will have no option but to retaliate and fire at the sources of fire, even if they will be embedded in civilian areas. We will do our utmost to be as precise as we can, but if Israeli lives are at stake, we will do what is needed to defend them. And here from Tel Aviv, I call upon everybody listening, whatever ways and means you have of carrying that message, of informing the world of the very basic fundamental wrong that Hezbollah is doing, then that would be a blessing, and it would save lives, because the less Hezbollah does it, the more pressure that will be applied on Hezbollah, the better the situation will be, and hopefully we won't find ourselves in conflict. But if it happens, it is a very, very dire and serious matter. So that's the, let's say, the strategic picture of Hezbollah. A few words about the southern part of Lebanon. I'll move ever so slowly to the southern part of Lebanon and the border with Israel. Again, I apologize for most of the text being in Hebrew and Arabic, but there's a few things in English as well. So now I'm zooming in on the border between Israel and Lebanon. Israel here to the south, this area here, this is Kiryat Shmona, the tip of the finger of the Galilee. This here is southern Lebanon, Rosh HaNikra, the border crossing here to the left, and of course the blue line here, which distinguishes between Lebanon and Israel. In short, the situation in southern Lebanon is relatively stable. But under the ground, underneath that very thin veneer of normal and stable situation, what we have is an area controlled totally by Hezbollah, rife with weapons, rockets, and where Hezbollah, unfortunately, and contrary to UN Security Council Resolution 1701, enjoys full freedom of movement to do whatever it wants in southern Lebanon. Despite the fact that there is a UN peacekeeping force called UNIFIL, which in essence is a positive factor, which has a few positive effects on the region, but the bottom line from our perspective is that 1701 is not implemented, and it's not implemented because Hezbollah doesn't allow the UN troops to implement their mandate. The UN troops cannot move freely, they cannot document, and therefore they do not report. These are three crucial elements which again may create a false or an imaginary situation where if you ask the UN or if you ask anybody who doesn't live in northern Israel what's going on in southern Lebanon, they'll say, well, fine, I haven't heard anything about southern Lebanon, so I guess everything's okay. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And what we know is happening in southern Lebanon is you could basically imagine a powder keg that on Iranian directives might be ignited. That's the shortest way of me telling you what southern Lebanon is at the hands of Hezbollah and how dangerous the situation is. Now, we've enjoyed 14 years of stability and quiet, which is excellent. And we want 14 more years or 28 years of stability. And I'm happy that there are 13 and 14-year-old kids in Kiryat Shmona and in northern Israel who haven't heard the sounds of a siren. That's a beautiful thing that I'm happy about. And it is our intention, the IDF's intention and strategy to continue with this reality. However, in all fairness, the situation on the other side of the border is a very volatile one. And again, the really negative thing is that decisions, unfortunately, are not made in Beirut, they are made in Tehran. And Hezbollah operates according to Iranian incentives and orders, and that is really the X factor which could rapidly destabilize the situation. Now, there's many moving parts in the Middle East. There are elections in the US, and there's many things happening in the Middle East. And you alluded to, Mrs. Gevorb, you alluded to it before. Lots of dynamics going on. And since Iran has a very well-armed and unfortunately effective military proxy, Hezbollah, in Lebanon, that could be used against Israel and could ignite things that I think none of us want, definitely wouldn't serve the interests of civilians in Israel, definitely wouldn't serve the interests of civilians in Lebanon or the state of Lebanon, because they would face a very, very strong response from us if we are fired upon. I can assure you that. That is the situation in short. Relative stability, but lots of things going on underground and parallel to when we speak. If we move a little bit to the northeast and look at our Syrian border, the Golan Heights. So we're looking at the Golan Heights here, the Kinneret, Sea of Galilee here, the Golan Heights, the demilitarized zone between Israel, the Israeli Golan Heights on the left, and the Syrian Golan Heights on the right. And then we have Damascus, approximately 60 kilometers away from the border here. And the situation on the ground today, in general, you know, for 40 years, and I know that many in the crowd are much more senior than me and much more experienced and knowledgeable. You lived through the Yom Kippur War, you know the reality of what happened there. I didn't, I was born in 79. But since basically 74 and until 2011, we had many years, almost 40 years of relative stability on the ground, our quietest border. Then 7 or 8 years of Syrian war, which destabilized the situation. But now we are back to a regime-controlled Syrian Golan Heights, which means that there is one address in terms of responsibility, the Syrian regime, but and there are no more significant rebel strongholds on our border, which is a good thing. But the negative thing is what the Syrian regime is allowing to come to the Syrian front against Israel, and to use and how they're allowing Iranians and Hezbollah to use Syria as a stepping stone or a launching ground to attack Israel. So it's very much connected. Hezbollah in Lebanon are also operating and trying to establish a presence. I'll zoom in here on the northern part of the Golan Heights, the northern part of the Syrian Golan Heights. There's a town called Khader. It's here in Hebrew and in Arabic. Maybe it'll come up in English. But here, this town here, Khader. So this is Israel here, Majd al-Shams, and a few Druze villages. This is the Hermon mountain, the ski site, the Hermon ski site here. And then we have the demilitarized zone. And then there's Khader, a Syrian town just outside of the demilitarized zone. Why is it important? Because this is a town where we see the most dominant, we see the most dynamic efforts by Hezbollah, supported by the Syrian regime, to establish a foothold here in this village. And the distance between Khader and the Israeli border is less than 3 kilometers. So we're talking about very close distances. They've already tried to attack from here, and we've thwarted those attacks. We know that they're still trying to establish a presence here, terrorist infrastructure, both Iranian operated militia as well as proper Hezbollah operatives. That is a concern for us, and we're operating day and night in order to undermine those activities. A last 2 sentences about Syria before we wrap up the big picture. What really bothers the IDF and the state of Israel with regards to Syria, I really have to zoom out in order to tell that story, is more related to transit. You should think about, if you'd like, you should think about Syria as a giant transit hub of Iranian weapons, personnel, and capabilities that come from Iran over here, various airports, either on the ground or via air to the Damascus International Airport, and from then various locations inside Syria, and also transit to Lebanon. That is ongoing as we speak. The Iranians, unfortunately, continue to use Syria as a launch pad. What they're trying to do, strategically speaking, is to forward deploy military capabilities in Western Syria so that they'll be able to attack Israel from Western Syria. I don't know if all of you know, and it has been hugely underreported in international media, and especially in English or British media, but Iran, using Iranian forces and Iranian loyal militia, have already attacked Israel 6 times over the last 2.5 years. The first attack was in February 2018, and they've tried 5 additional times since then. We've been able to stop or to intercept or thwart all of those attacks, no Israeli casualties, and each time we were attacked, we responded quite strongly against Iranian military facilities in Syria. And since for more than a year they haven't tried to attack, the last attack attempt was in September of 2019, but that is a strategic threat against us. And that is of course a concern. Against that, what we're doing is an ongoing campaign. We call it the campaign between wars, which is a campaign of continuous military operations of varying intensity, some of it a little bit above the threshold and some of it below the threshold. The aim is to undermine Iranian entrenchment in Syria, but it is also to avoid an all-out war or major military confrontation. And it's a very fine balance of constantly attacking their convoys and their military facilities in Syria, and the research facilities and the weapons manufacturing facilities and many other things. We attack those locations repeatedly, and we attack Iranian affiliated militia and anything that tries to attack us. And but we do so with the intention of not reaching a major escalation, which we are not seeking, definitely not at this stage. To wrap up all this and to say just a word about our force design and how we are addressing the different challenges that we face, I'll say that the strategic outlook is that we have many challenges. I spoke in the beginning about Gaza, so I won't repeat about Hamas and the tunnels and rockets. I've spoken about Hezbollah, and I've spoken about Iranians and Syria. There are, of course, a few other threats, but I won't go into them. I will just say that we are, of course, we're monitoring events very closely in the region, including geopolitical events and how they influence. I can say that we have very good relations with the Jordanian armed forces as well as the Egyptian armed forces. And since this is a recorded and on-record talk, I won't be able to elaborate further, but I can assure you that we are not sitting idly by and waiting for other alliances to be made, but we are taking the initiative all over the region in order to safeguard ourselves, in order to promote our military or our strategic interests, having strong alliances that support those interests, and based on the understanding that is now more and more prevailing in the Middle East, that the problem isn't Israel, the threat isn't Israel. Contrary to that, Israel in many ways, when it comes to Iranian aggression and Iranian expansionism in the Middle East, To many, Israel is the guardian and a defender against that. I'll end with a nice catchphrase that Thomas Friedman told me. He said, well, you know, I think that between Tehran and Tel Aviv, there's only soft tissue. You may have read it or seen it, but I think that's I think it rings very true, because the Iranians were used to getting their way and having their will in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria, and of course in Lebanon, and they've tried other locations. They have now come close enough to be within, let's say, convenient striking range of our weapons and our abilities, and they have been, I would say, brazen and perhaps foolish enough, and I say this without even an ounce of hubris, because we are careful and we know that it is a very potent enemy we are talking about, but they have been brazen enough to attack Israel 6 times. We have responded, and that is the context that we are in. Many interesting things are happening, and it's an interesting time to be a spokesperson. Last thing before we go to questions, I would be happy if you're not doing it already, but since there is so much misinformation out there, and since, let's say, the anti-Israeli filters in British media are very thick and strong and active, they're always on, these filters, very little gets through. I would encourage you to follow our social media platforms, our Twitter page, our Facebook page, most importantly Twitter, but if you're not big fans of Twitter, then Facebook as well, and be updated with anything happening in Israel related to the military. And in addition, once in a while you get a nice Shabbat Shalom with beautiful young men and women wishing you a Shabbat Shalom, and of course holidays and everything else. But the core purpose is, of course, to inform people around the world of our reality as we face it. So I hope I haven't spoken too much, maybe a little bit, I've digressed a little bit, but I think there's still time for questions, and I'd be very happy to try to answer those.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel, for really covering so much ground so superbly. Really, we are so grateful. I know what huge skill that takes. So really, toda rabba.
Thank you.
If I can kick off with the first question from Dame Louise Ellman. Will the Abraham Accords lead to a different approach from the Palestinians, and is it likely to be a unified approach?
Well, Dame Ellman has a very, I think that's a very intelligent question. That's a question that we and our intelligence establishment is asking ourselves and asking our analysts. Of course, looking at, again, and I can speak, you know, I won't speak about the political level, I'll speak about military, looking at how Palestinians are responding. And what really is at the core of my business, my responsibility as the military, is whether or not this will lead to violence, whether or not this will lead to what they call intifada, or rockets, or suicide bombers, or whatever else they would try to use violently against Israel. As of now, and I put a giant asterisk and a hedge on that. As of now, we do not see a spike. We do not see added or additional intentions to cause violence or to launch some kind of sustained violence against Israel. But I can assure you that we monitor that continuously. But I think and this is me thinking and not IDF solid intelligence and assessment, I think that it's really decision time, and that events are unraveling quickly in the area. Many, let's say, signs are being provided to Palestinians that maybe it's time to, as Waze says when there's a blocked road, to recalculate the route and to think of other options, how to assess Israel. Again, that's a bit beyond military, but on the military level, we are deployed along the borders with our ears to the ground, listening to any new developments. And so far, a cautious response would be that we do not see a change yet. It might happen in the future if there's growing frustration. If anything else happens, it might happen, and we will, of course, respond to that in kind.
Thank you so much for that. So it's so enlightening to hear the actual facts from the ground. The next question is a Lebanese question from our Vice President of the Board of Deputies, Edwin Shuker. How significant are the talks between Lebanon and Israel to map up the maritime borders? Will it be followed by mapping the land border? And has a long-term arrangement with Hezbollah been agreed?
Thank you for that. So there's no long-term agreement with Hezbollah. The negotiations, we've had one meeting, a team led by officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, by the National Security Council, and of course representatives from the IDF. They crossed to Rosh Hanikra and had a good, meaningful first meeting. The aim is to focus on the maritime border and the economic exclusive zone. At this stage, we are not speaking about the ground or the terrestrial border. We'll see how things develop, and we are now focusing on the maritime border. A bit behind the scenes, if you look at the situation, then we are already manufacturing, we are already producing gas. So and at a good situation, and it takes quite a few years to reach that stage, as everybody knows. The Lebanese aren't, and the Lebanese are in a very, very, even by Lebanese standards, horrible financial situation. So it would be mutually beneficial for Israel and Lebanon to agree on a maritime border and economic exclusive zones for both sides. It would be great for us. I think it would be absolutely amazing for the Lebanese, because the potential income revenue for the Lebanese state would be massive. It's a source of revenue that they don't have. I know that they import around the equivalent of $5 billion US, and I may be mistaken, but these are the figures that I remember. Around $5 billion US yearly are the expenditures for energy, for fuel, in order to fuel their electricity plants in Lebanon. And as you know, there are quite a lot of shortages on electricity in Lebanon. So if they'll be able to agree on a line, start searching for gas and oil, hopefully for them, they'll find it, and then start to produce, that could be a huge game changer for the state of Lebanon. And they have really a lot to gain from reaching such an agreement. Usually when you do agreements, you have many things to gain. All of the Jordanian agriculture in the Valley of Jordan relies on water provided by Israel, as an example from 1992. Here we're talking about gas and exploration, and it would be great for Lebanon. It would be excellent for us, and it would provide additional capabilities. I'll say just one last thing about it. The gas rig that we have in the Mediterranean, we have two gas rigs, one in the north, one in the south. Unfortunately, one close to Lebanon, Hezbollah, one in the south, close to Hamas, Gaza. You can't have it all. We're happy we have gas, and it would have been nice to have them closer to Tel Aviv, further away from our enemies. But Baruch Hashem, it's nice to have finally have a natural resource anyhow. But the mission of the Navy, the Israeli Navy, is to protect those facilities. We do so with the most advanced vessels that we have, and in a few months we will receive our latest addition to the Navy, our SAR 6. SAR is a storm in Hebrew. Our SAR 6 class corvettes, which are now being completed in Germany, in Kiel, and they will soon make their way. The first one will soon make its way to Israel, to the Israeli Navy, and they will be a giant leap forward in terms of our ability to defend, first of all, the naval corridor, the supply to Israel. 98% of all goods coming into Israel come via the sea, two ports, Haifa and Ashdod, and of course to safeguard those those gas rigs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And from the Navy to the air, we have a question from Rui Ezri Valero, and he asks, how is the IDF planning to overcome the advanced anti-air capability used by Hezbollah?
So I have to remind myself that we are on record. Otherwise, I had a really nice response to that. But since we're on record, I will say this. The Israeli Air Force is, again, without bragging, one of the most advanced in the world, which has a lot of combat experience. It is active as we speak and as I alluded to before, dealing or mitigating Iranian entrenchment in Syria. The airspace above Syria is one of the densest in the world. Lots of powers with very advanced capabilities. Not all of those powers are friendly, to say the least, and many conflicting interests and many moving parts on the ground. In that reality, the IAF, Israeli Air Force, has been able to successfully and continuously operate surgically against Iranian military targets for more than 5 years. That, I think, is the best answer to the question of how will we deal with whatever advanced capabilities Hezbollah may or may not have. We study it, we collect intelligence, we analyze. The IAF produces the TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures to deal with those threats. And I, for one, even though I'm infantry and I've only flown in helicopters, never in a fighter jet, I have really maximum belief and confidence in the IAF's ability to overcome whatever challenges they face. History tells us that that has been true since 48, 67, 73, 82, 83, 84, and also recent years. No room for complacency, no room to be smug or happy about ourselves, but it's an ongoing learning contest. And so far, the IAF is really very much up to that task.
Thank you so much for that. Next question is from Jonathan Asulin, WJCJD. He asks, in the event of another Hezbollah or Hamas war, what are the expected repercussions on the new peace deals with the UAE and Bahrain? Could these deals and new relationships conversely help to prevent future conflicts? Or is another war or flare-up inevitable and just a matter of time?
On a military level, I don't see a real connection between the two parts of the question. Hamas or Hezbollah could try to attack Israel and launch rockets and perhaps do other things. Hezbollah at the behest of Iran, Hamas according to their calculations and perhaps out of their misery and distress. Again, I'm talking about military misery. I'm not talking about the civilians, but Hamas is really at the situation where they have limited military options against us. Now that we're going to complete the barrier, then we will effectively deal a severe blow to Hamas's ability to terrorize Israeli civilians with tunnels. But if any of them decide to attack Israel, then of course we will respond strongly. We won't tolerate that. And I think it's a bit preliminary to say how that will influence regional geopolitics. I can say that it is much more important to have open lines of communication with Egypt, with Jordan, and with other regional countries, which traditionally have been positive in stabilizing situations and winding down escalating tensions.
Thank you so much. The next question you touched on slightly when you mentioned attacking Iranian convoys in Syria. Siggy Ingleby asks, if the IDF know where the missiles are, is there not a benefit to neutralize Hezbollah's weapons before an attack happens? And what is the cost-benefit calculation that the army uses, and what are the red lines that the IDF has?
I won't, I've said this a few times. It's a wise thing for a military spokesperson not to answer hypothetical questions. I do like my job, so I won't specifically answer the hypothetics. And I can say that, not to leave a total blank here. Yes, we have lots of intelligence, military intelligence, and we have lots of actionable targets, Hezbollah facilities. We know a lot about where they store their rockets, where they have their command and control facilities, where their fighters are, etc., etc. And the decision how to address those isn't a decision that the IDF has, but it's rather a decision that the government, the Israeli government has, the security cabinet, the prime minister, of course, in consultation with the Minister of Defense. And since it is widely understood and assessed that if we would strike such targets, that would lead to a response from the other side. So since that is the case, then the decision and weighing the pros and cons lies with the government, not with the IDF, and I'll have to leave it with that.
Thank you so much. The next question is an interesting one from Dori Schmetterling. To what extent do you think the developing relationships with the Gulf states is just a matter of a pragmatic anti-Iranian alliance? And if Israel and Iranian relations ever improved, like in the Shah's day, would these relations disintegrate as a result?
From a military perspective, I would say that the question holds a lot of merit. The underlying premise of the question holds a lot of merit because indeed, many countries in the region have come to the understanding that Iran is the threat, Israel stands against Iran, and therefore it would be wise, good, practical, and beneficial to be on good terms with Israel. And definitely, the Iranian menace in the region, I'm sure, plays a factor in decision-making in various countries in the region. Personally, I do not think that, but then the added value, which isn't military, when you think about all of the economic opportunities that are now unfolding for commerce between the countries, I think they will be massive. And I think that they will be really a safeguard or a guarantee, or at least a very, very significant weight on the side of stability and long-term normalization and peace. It's of course impossible to say what will happen in the future. My belief is that, of course, we provide security. We will continue to defend ourselves and speak or rather act, walk the talk, as we say, act exactly as we say that we're doing, as in defending against Iran. Countries in the region see that, understand that, and therefore there is more value of being in good relations with Israel. And what will happen in the future, it's very difficult to say, but I'm hopeful that it will go beyond, of course, security. And judging by the amount of interest in Israel and judging by the quick response and the aptitude for challenges and to identify opportunities, economic opportunities that Israelis are famous for, I'm sure that there will be good grounds of bottom-up cooperation in the future as well.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel. And we are running over, but we will have time for just one more question, if we may. And I'm sorry in advance if we haven't managed to cover all of the fascinating questions that you've asked us. From Lawrence Julius, what is the threat from drones to Israel?
When the chief of our general staff, Lieutenant General Aviv Kochavi, started his tenure almost 2 years ago, he ordered a massive staff work, and one of the underlying parts or the tenets of that was to analyze the combat environment, the current one and the future one, which we will face, which we, the IDF, will face against our enemies. We see an growingly densely populated urban terrain. Almost wherever we look that our enemies are, they are embedded in urban areas. They are using civilians as human shields, whether it is Lebanon, Gaza, the Syrian front, and other locations. And it's very difficult to distinguish between combatant and non-combatant. That isn't unique to Israel. Americans and British troops faced that or faced it in Iraq and Afghanistan and other locations. And counterterrorism operations around the world face many of those same challenges. They're not unique, but the magnitude and how those characteristics are becoming more dominant are very clear. We also looked at what kind of weapon systems we are going to be facing. And regarding the question, drones or semi-autonomous weapon systems, or another military speak, loitering munition, as in drones that move slower than missiles but are capable of striking targets. You could also, they're popularly called killer drones or kamikaze drones, the type of weapons that Iran used in order to attack the Saudi oil facilities almost a year ago. Those kind of munitions are definitely a growing future threat. We understand that we will meet those threats in the battlefield, whatever the battle will be. We are, on one hand, developing countermeasures against enemy capabilities, and we've made significant improvements. And on the other hand, I can also say that, as I'm sure many of the people know, we have, Israel is one of the largest exporters in the world. Actually, a few years ago, we were the #1 exporter of UAVs, drones. We're not the largest manufacturer, but we're the largest exporter. So we have lots of expertise on that as well. And we are developing all kinds of weapon systems, which I, of course, won't elaborate about. But it is definitely a component of future war, of current, but also future warfare, remotely controlled systems, semi-autonomous systems, loitering munitions. All of these buzzwords are really what's happening now and will happen in the future. And if there's a massive battlefield, we will see these on the ground. And it's a part of what we are building our capabilities against. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel. And we really, really do appreciate your spending time with us. And I think we are all far more educated as a result. We wish you the greatest of safety and success. And I will now hand over to Rabbi Dweck.
Thank you, Efrat. Lieutenant Colonel, as the senior rabbi for the community, I know I speak for all of us that had the privilege of hearing your briefing tonight, that we are so grateful for your time and your focus and sharing of your very busy schedule to share all of this with us tonight. It has given us a sense of the multiple, complex, and very real and serious threats that constantly threaten Israel. And it has also shown us how astonishingly the IDF works to protect her borders. And it really has, I can definitely say for me, and I know for so many of us, has given us new perspective on what Medinat Israel is doing in order to be able to ensure its safety, and not only its safety, but its thriving. And so we are very honored that you've spent the time tonight. We thank you and your entire team for bringing this together and bringing this to us. I want to, yeah, thank you. I want to thank the Board of Deputies, Sheila Gewald, also a member of the S&P Sephardi Community, and Talia Ingleby for helping bring this together. And I want to thank the World Jewish Congress. And I specifically want to thank Dr. Efrat Sofer, also a member of our S&P Sephardi Community, wearing the hats of not only the Board of Deputies as a deputy, but the World Jewish Congress, and a co-opted member of the board of the S&P. Efrat, I know that you worked very hard to bring this to us tonight. And we are all very, very grateful that you did, and very honored to be able to have this opportunity to hear this unique briefing. And on that note, I want to thank all of you who have registered and tuned in to participate with this in this tonight. It's a great pride for the S&P Sephardi community that we have this beautiful connection with Medinat Israel and our very Zionistic feelings and love for the Medina, not only in our presence there, but in our prayers and in our commitment to its welfare. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for their participation, and we look forward to being able to do other things like this in the future.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to unmute you all so you can all say goodbye as you go. But thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
See International Division on Thursday. Bye.
Thank you very much.
תודה רבה, הצלחה.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
All two.
Everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Shalom.
Bye-bye.
What? You want me to go?
Hi, Tally.
Okay, I'm coming down.
Can you do that, Jack?
Myself. Wash up and then I want to put the curtains up. So upset about that upstairs.
For anyone who's left, I hope you're all keeping well, and very nice to see you here tonight. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and Efrat, you did amazingly well. Thank you so much for all the time that you spent. So thank you. You did amazing. Well done, Sheila. Well done, Talia.
Thanks, Marie.
Very good attendance.
Families are facing this.
I'm sorry to hear it.
So desperately needs money too.
Next, the woman who admitted she binned what could have been crucial Grenfell Tower evidence broke down at the inquiry today. She faced another day of tough questions. While giving evidence, she worked for the building's landlords, also revealed she
Sheila, I don't know if you want to discuss anything. If not, I'm happy to just close down.
Yeah, I think so. Well done.